He took his wife to a party, but she disappeared into the night with another man. What he did next shock her. He thought it was just another night out with his wife, an evening of music, laughter, and celebration. But the moment he turned his head, she was gone. No goodbye, no hesitation. She disappeared into the night on the arm of another man. That betrayal should have broken him. But what he did next didn't just shock her. It destroyed everything she thought she knew about him, about their marriage, and about the price of betrayal. The hall glittered with chandeliers that rained gold light over the sea of gowns and tuxedos. Laughter spilled from polished lips, champagne fizzed in crystal flutes, and the air smelled of wealth, ambition, and secrets. Michael Cole arrived with Vanessa at his side, his hand resting lightly over hers. To outsiders, they looked like royalty. His tall, commanding presence matched with her flawless beauty. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Vanessa's eyes never rested on him. They darted across the ballroom like a thief searching for something she'd already lost. Michael noticed. He had noticed for months. The way she shifted away when he touched her in public. The way she answered his questions with half smiles and half truths. The perfume she wore only when she went out alone. He carried these observations like weights in his chest, never confronting, always watching. He believed in patience, in timing, in allowing silence to speak louder than accusation. Tonight he wanted to believe that all of it, every cold glance, every strange call, was just his imagination. For the first 20 minutes, he played the part. He greeted business associates, clinked glasses with old friends, introduced his wife to admirers who complimented her beauty more than his success. But every time he turned to her, her smile was thin, her body stiff, her gaze elsewhere. Still, he endured it. Still, he hoped. Then came the moment. Michael turned to embrace an old university friend who had spotted him across the hall. It took less than a minute. By the time he turned back, Vanessa's seat was empty. Her champagne glass sat abandoned on the table, half drunk, her lipstick staining the rim. For one dizzying heartbeat, Michael thought she'd gone to the buffet, or perhaps stepped away to the powder room. But instinct clawed at his gut, sharp and undeniable. Something was wrong. He scanned the crowd, his eyes slicing through sequined dresses and polished suits. No trace of her, no flicker of that familiar figure. A waiter drifted past and Michael's hand shot out, stopping him mid-step. "The woman who was here," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Did you see where she went?" The waiter shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as though afraid to speak. "Yes, sir. She went outside, with a man. Tall, gray suit." Michael's voice was steady, almost frighteningly calm. "Do you know his name?" The waiter hesitated, then whispered, "Mr. Richard." Michael's heart didn't race. It slowed, deliberate, heavy. Richard, his associate, his so-called friend. The name landed like a blade, cutting through months of suspicion and unspoken doubts. He remembered the way Richard's eyes lingered on Vanessa a little too long during meetings, the offhand jokes, the subtle compliments. He remembered, too, the night Vanessa had compared Richard's fire to his own quiet. That night, he had swallowed the words rising in his throat. Tonight, silence was no longer protection. It was a weapon. Michael didn't storm after them. He didn't shout. He adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the security booth. "Show me the last 10 minutes of footage," he instructed. The screen flickered, grainy but damning. Vanessa, arm in arm with Richard, slipping into the night, her head tilted back in laughter, her sequined gown catching the streetlight like shattered glass. She didn't glance back. Not once. Michael exhaled slowly, his reflection in the monitor colder than the images it replayed. He whispered almost to himself, "So this is the game." And in that moment, something inside him shifted. Not brokenness, not surrender, but a calm so dangerous it promised destruction. Vanessa didn't waste time hiding. By the next morning, photos of her with Richard surfaced on social media, taken from angles that looked intentional. Her laughter exaggerated, his hand possessively around her waist. The captions from party guests dripped with gossip. So that's why she disappeared. Michael Cole's wife caught leaving with his associate. Within hours, Lagos knew. What had been whispered in corners last night became trending headlines today. Michael read none of it directly. He didn't have to. His phone buzzed endlessly with concerned messages, half pity, half curiosity. Old friends called. Business partners tested the waters, their words soaked with hidden questions. Was he broken? Would this scandal destabilize him? He answered each one calmly. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. His tone was so even that it unnerved those who knew him best, because Michael was not a man who explained pain. He was a man who absorbed it until it sharpened into something else. Meanwhile, Vanessa basked in the attention. She moved into Richard's penthouse overlooking the lagoon, the kind of place she had once begged Michael to buy, but he had refused, preferring investments over extravagance. Now she flaunted the view with careless abandon, posting pictures of champagne breakfasts and diamond bracelets, each one tagged with Richard beside her. In her mind, Michael was already history. She told her friends in hushed, gloating tones that she had upgraded, that Michael was too quiet, too patient, too unwilling to chase the fast life she deserved. To her, Richard's loud ambition and constant need to display wealth felt like power. She mistook noise for strength, forgetting that silence could be deadlier, but not everyone was blinded by the glitter. One evening, Michael sat in his study, staring at the wedding photograph on the wall, the same photo Vanessa had once kissed with tears in her eyes, promising forever. Now that forever was worth less than the phone she had left buzzing on Richard's marble counter. Michael's jaw tightened, but he did not throw the frame. Instead, he picked up his own phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A deep voice answered on the second ring. Michael, it's been a while. I need you, Michael said simply. Tonight. The man was James, an old friend, once a private investigator before he retired into quiet family life. But when Michael asked, James came. By midnight, Michael was sitting across from him, handing him a file. Inside were details Michael had quietly collected. Suspicious withdrawals from their joint account, unexplained receipts, late-night calls logged under false names. Michael hadn't acted on them before, choosing patience over confrontation. But now patience had turned into ammunition. James flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. You want the truth laid bare? Michael's eyes were steel. No, I want proof that breaks her, proof she can't deny, and I want it clean. The investigator's smile was thin, knowing. Then give me a week. You'll have more than proof. You'll have her entire game in your hands. Michael leaned back, exhaling. For the first time since Vanessa walked out with Richard, he allowed himself the faintest smile. Not of joy, not of forgiveness, but of calculation, the kind of smile that hinted at storms on the horizon. Outside, Lagos glittered with nightlife, cars honking, lovers laughing. Somewhere across the city, Vanessa clinked her glass against Richard's, convinced she had won. But what she didn't know was that the silence she mocked was already gathering into a weapon sharp enough to slice through everything she thought she had built. James worked in silence, the kind of silence that came from years of watching, waiting, and striking when no one expected it. Within days, he delivered his first batch of photographs to Michael's study. Each one told a story darker than the last. Vanessa and Richard were not a sudden spark of passion. They had been a fire smoldering behind Michael's back for months. Dinner dates in quiet restaurants. Secret meetings in hotel lobbies. Late-night drives in Richard's car, where Vanessa leaned against his shoulder like a woman long comfortable with betrayal. Michael turned each photo over slowly, his eyes calm, but his grip tight. Every image was proof, not of love, but of conspiracy. Because behind the intimacy, there were other faces. Businessmen Michael recognized, men who once pretended loyalty, but now dined with Richard as Vanessa played hostess. It wasn't just adultery, it was strategy. James leaned back in his chair, watching Michael process it. They didn't just take you for a fool, Michael. They're setting you up. Richard wants more than your wife. He wants your empire. Michael's face revealed nothing, but his silence stretched heavy across the room. He remembered late nights when Richard had asked seemingly harmless questions about shares, assets, expansions. He remembered Vanessa once urging him to let Richard help more in the company. Back then, Michael thought it was flattery. Now he saw it as a script rehearsed between them. "Tell me everything," Michael said finally. And James did. He laid out text messages intercepted from Vanessa's hidden phone. Messages where she mocked Michael's calmness, where she called him too weak to stop anything. One line burned brighter than the rest. "After the party, he'll be irrelevant. Then we can push him to sign everything over." Michael's jaw tightened. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, but inside a decision was being forged. Betrayal was painful. Conspiracy was war. "Do you want me to keep digging?" James asked. Michael shook his head slowly. "No, I've seen enough. They think patience is weakness. They think silence means surrender. They're wrong." He rose from his chair, walked to the window, and looked out at the city shimmering in the night. From here, the world saw him as the man who had been humiliated, the man whose wife left him for another, the man who had lost. But in Michael's mind, a different narrative was already being written, one where every move Vanessa and Richard made only tightened the rope around their own necks. He turned back to James, his voice steady. "Let them laugh. Let them celebrate. The higher they climb, the harder they'll fall." James studied him, then nodded slowly, almost with pity. He had seen revenge consume men before. But in Michael's calm, he sensed something else. Revenge sharpened into precision. That night, while Vanessa posted another photograph from Richard's penthouse, captioned with hearts and champagne emojis, Michael sat alone at his desk drafting letters. Not angry rants, not bitter confessions, but quiet legal documents, transfers, trusts, protections. He wasn't reacting. He was preparing. Vanessa thought she had left Michael in the past. What she didn't know was that she had walked straight into his future, one where her laughter would turn to begging, her triumph to ruin, and her betrayal into the very fuel of her downfall. The city whispered, and Vanessa made sure of it. Every photograph she posted with Richard was polished to perfection. His hand on her waist, her lips tilted in a triumphant smile, champagne flutes raised to the skyline. The captions were smug, crafted like knives for Michael to read. "Finally with a man who knows my worth. Some doors are meant to be closed forever." Each one drew comments, half praise, half scandal, but Vanessa basked in them like sunlight. Richard encouraged it. He liked the spectacle, liked watching the world see Michael's humiliation. Together they painted a picture of victory, and Vanessa believed it completely. To her, Michael was finished, irrelevant, forgotten. He had lost his wife, his pride, his place in the glittering circle that mattered most to her. But Michael was none of those things. He stayed out of sight, ignoring the parties, ignoring the whispers. His silence was deliberate, calculated. To the outside world, he looked broken, a man crushed by betrayal, hiding from the shame of being replaced. Vanessa believed it. Richard boasted about it. And the more they laughed, the deeper their confidence grew. That was exactly what Michael wanted. In truth, he was moving faster than ever. Each night after the city lights dimmed, he sat at his desk drafting letters, making calls, signing documents. Shares were quietly transferred into trusts under his niece's name. Accounts were split into legal compartments no outsider could touch, and key partners received discreet messages securing their loyalty to him alone. He built a fortress around his empire, brick by brick, while his enemies celebrated outside its gates. But he knew patience wasn't enough. He needed them to make the first move, to reveal their greed in the open. And so he played the role of the broken man. He ignored calls. He declined invitations. He let stories circulate that he was drinking too much, sleeping too little, wasting away in grief. It was bait, and Vanessa bit into it without hesitation. One afternoon, she walked boldly into his office, Richard waiting outside with a smug grin. She wore a silk dress too expensive to be bought with her boutique's earnings, her perfume thick enough to announce her before she spoke. She stood before Michael's desk, eyes sharp with cruelty. "You should sign everything over to Richard," she said casually, like she was suggesting a business lunch. "It's time to move on. What's left of your company is better in stronger hands. You can't handle it anymore." Michael looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Then without protest, without a single word, he opened his drawer, pulled out a prepared folder, and slid it across the desk. "If that's what you want," he said calmly, his voice flat, almost mechanical. Vanessa blinked, thrown for a moment by how easily he complied. She expected begging, anger, resistance, but not this eerie calm. Still, her pride wouldn't let her question it. She snatched the folder, smiled with satisfaction, and swept out of the office. When the door closed, Michael leaned back in his chair and allowed the faintest smile to curl at his lips. His hand pressed against the second drawer, where another set of documents lay waiting, the ones that would undo everything she thought she had just gained. Vanessa arrived at Richard's penthouse glowing with triumph. She tossed the folder Michael had given her onto the glass table between them like a prize, her laughter echoing across the wide room. "It's done," she said, pouring herself a drink. "He signed everything without a fight. Michael's finished." Richard leaned back on the leather sofa, a cigar smoldering between his fingers. He flipped through the papers quickly, his grin spreading. "I told you, didn't I? He's soft. Too soft. He never had the fire to hold on to all that he built. Some men are born lions, others sheep." He looked at Vanessa with a sly smile. "And you chose the lion." They clinked glasses, drowning themselves in celebration, blind to the trap already tightening around them. Vanessa's phone lit up with messages from her friends, women who once envied her marriage but now praised her upgrade. Each compliment swelled her pride, each word of admiration pushing her further from the man she thought she had destroyed. But while she basked in shallow victories, Michael sat in his office with his lawyer, Mr. Adeniyi, the folder's twin lying open between them. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents carefully. "She thinks you've handed it all over," he said slowly, his tone a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "But these are decoys. Nothing binding, nothing dangerous. Clever. You've given them enough to feel secure while you've already stripped the real power from their reach." Michael nodded, his expression calm. They wanted control. Let them believe they have it. Let them taste it. It will make the fall harder. He rose and walked to the window, staring at the city lights twinkling in the distance. His reflection looked back at him, steady, unreadable. "Richard believes ambition makes him stronger," Michael continued. "But ambition without patience is a curse. He'll overplay his hand. Vanessa will encourage it, thinking she's won. And when they push too far, everything they touch will crumble beneath them." The lawyer closed the folder and leaned forward. "And when that happens?" Michael's voice was quiet, but every syllable carried weight. "Then I'll remind them that silence isn't weakness. It's preparation." That night, Richard threw a private party, inviting only select friends, men eager to circle around what they thought was his rising empire. Vanessa wore diamonds Michael once bought her, parading them like trophies of conquest. She laughed too loudly, smiled too widely, and held Richard's arm with the same practiced ease she once used on her husband. To everyone watching, she looked victorious. But beneath the glitter and champagne, the ground had already begun to shift. Michael stayed home, alone in his study, the hum of the city muffled by thick glass windows. He didn't scroll through headlines, didn't respond to messages, didn't feed the gossip. Instead, he poured himself a glass of whiskey, set the untouched drink on the table, and whispered into the stillness, "By tomorrow, she'll have signed her own downfall." The penthouse pulsed with music that spilled out into the Lagos night, drowning even the traffic below. Chandeliers glowed against mirrored walls, tables sagged under the weight of champagne bottles and platters of lobster, and laughter rolled across the rooftop like thunder. It wasn't just a party, it was a coronation. Vanessa stood at the center of it all, glittering in a new gown of emerald silk that caught the light with every movement. She moved from guest to guest, her laughter sharp, her voice dripping with pride. "Michael, oh, please." He handed everything over without a fight, she told a group of women who leaned in eagerly. He was never strong enough. Richard is the man with vision, with power. Every time she said Michael's name, she made it smaller, thinner, like a thread she could snap in her hand. Her friends, hungry for gossip, nodded and whispered, their eyes darting toward Richard as if he were already Lagos's next king. Richard soaked in the attention. He boasted openly now, cigar smoke curling above him as he clapped shoulders and shook hands. "We're taking things to the next level," he said, his voice booming across the room. "Michael Cole has retired. The future is mine." They laughed, they toasted, they danced. Vanessa even posted live clips on her socials, making sure Michael would see her flaunt her victory. Each smile into the camera, each kiss she planted on Richard's cheek was a message. "I've won, you've lost." But Michael wasn't watching. He didn't need to. The night swelled toward its peak, and Vanessa raised her glass to make a toast. "To new beginnings," she called out. "To real strength." The crowd erupted with cheers. Richard wrapped his arm around her, basking in the applause. It was the moment they had both been waiting for, public proof that they had destroyed Michael, that his silence meant defeat. And then the music stopped. The sudden silence was jarring, as though someone had pulled the thread from the fabric of the night. At the far end of the penthouse, the elevator doors opened with a chime, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He wasn't dressed for the party. He carried no smile, no drink. In his hand was a sealed envelope stamped with the crest of the High Court. The room shifted uneasily as he crossed the floor with slow, deliberate steps. The laughter dimmed, replaced by murmurs. Richard straightened, his cigar halfway to his lips, watching the man approach. Vanessa frowned, her smile faltering. The courier stopped before them, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Richard, Mrs. Cole," he said formally, his voice carrying over the hush. "This is for you. You've been served." Gasps erupted around the room. Vanessa's hand trembled as she took the envelope. The seal stared up at her like a verdict. She looked at Richard, who was already scowling, his bravado cracking. The courier gave a curt nod, then turned and walked back to the elevator. The doors closed, leaving behind silence heavier than the music had ever been. Vanessa tore at the envelope with shaking hands, pulling out thick papers stamped in red. Her eyes darted over the words, her lips moving silently until she froze, her face draining of color. Richard snatched the papers from her and began reading aloud. His voice faltered. The words revealed audits, claims, and legal filings none of them had expected. Their supposed empire was no longer theirs to celebrate. It was under siege. Around them, the guests shifted uncomfortably, murmurs turning into whispers. The room that had once roared with triumph now reeked of fear. And miles away, sitting alone in his study with a silent glass of whiskey, Michael Cole leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The first move had landed. Morning light spilled across the penthouse, harsh and unforgiving. Empty bottles littered the marble counters. Half-eaten platters sat forgotten, and the glitter of last night's celebration seemed pitiful against the silence that now hung in the air. Vanessa sat curled on the sofa, still in her emerald gown, her makeup smeared, the sealed documents spread across the coffee table like open wounds. Her hands shook as she tried to read through them again, each word heavier than the last. Richard paced the floor, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot. He snatched the papers from her, scanning them for the 100th time, his jaw tight with fury. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "These filings, these audits, they can't be real." But the stamps, the signatures, the legal language all screamed authenticity. Each line was a revelation, and none of it was in their favor. Vanessa leaned forward, clutching her knees. "He signed everything over to us. Richard, I was there. I watched him. How is this possible?" Richard slammed the papers onto the table. "Because he outplayed us. Don't you see? Those documents he gave us were worthless. They looked real enough to fool you, to fool me, but the actual ownership, the shares, the control, it's all still in his hands. Michael never gave us anything. He gave us shadows while he kept the substance." The truth sank in like ice water. Vanessa pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. She remembered Michael's calm eyes, the way he slid that folder across the desk without hesitation. She thought it was surrender. Now she realized it was theater. He had been acting, letting her walk away with what she thought was victory while holding the real crown behind his back. Her mind replayed his silence in those final days, his refusal to argue, the way he had simply let her go. It hadn't been weakness. It had been patience. Patience sharpened into a blade she hadn't seen until it cut her. Richard kicked over a chair, his rage spilling into the room. He made us look like fools in front of everyone. That courier, do you understand what this means? The board, the investors, the press, they all know now. We've been exposed, and it's his hand pulling the strings. Vanessa swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. What do we do? Richard stopped pacing and looked at her with blazing eyes. We push harder. If he thinks this will scare me off, he's wrong. I'll take his company from him, piece by piece. But first, his gaze narrowed, sharp as glass. We need to force him into the open. Vanessa nodded, but her heart was not in it. For the first time, fear settled into her bones. She remembered the way Michael had whispered at the party. So this is the game. She hadn't understood it then, but now those words haunted her. This wasn't a man caught off guard. This was a man who had seen the betrayal coming and chosen to let it play out, just so he could strike when it hurt the most. Across the city, Michael sat in a quiet meeting with his lawyers and trusted partners. His tone was calm, his instructions precise. Every move Richard made from here on would lead him deeper into the trap already set. Vanessa stared out at the lagoon through the glass walls of the penthouse. Last night she believed she had won. This morning she realized the truth. The party had been hers, but the war was his. The boardroom was a fortress of glass and steel, perched high above Lagos with a panoramic view of the city. Long polished tables stretched under cold fluorescent lights, and the men and women seated around it shifted uneasily in their leather chairs. At the head sat Richard, his suit crisp, his voice booming as he attempted to reassure the board. Michael Cole has stepped aside, he declared, his fist striking the table for emphasis. I am the future of this company. Expansion, growth, dominance. That is what I bring. You've seen the papers. He handed everything to me. You can put your faith in me now. Some nodded, others remained stiff. The courier's documents had shaken them more than Richard admitted. Whispers had circulated for days about legal challenges, about Michael's silence not being weakness, but calculation. Doubt gnawed at them, and Richard's bravado was beginning to sound desperate. The glass doors opened with a slow hiss, and every head turned. Michael Cole walked in. He was calm, composed, dressed in a dark suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His presence shifted the air in the room, steady and commanding. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was heavier than Richard's shouting. Michael, Richard sneered, rising from his chair. You're not welcome here. You don't belong at this table anymore. Michael walked to the far end of the table, placing a folder neatly before him. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each board member one by one. Then, with a calmness that cut deeper than anger, he spoke. I never left this table, and I never signed this company away. He opened the folder. Inside were the real documents, the ones that proved beyond any doubt that he was still the majority shareholder, that his control had never been shaken. Gasps echoed across the boardroom as pages slid across the polished wood. Richard's face drained of color. This is a trick. These can't be real. Michael didn't even glance at him. You've been celebrating with shadows, Richard. Every deal you've made, every boast you shouted, every toast you raised, it was all built on nothing. His voice was level, unyielding. The truth is simple. This company is mine, and you are finished. The chairman, a gray-haired man who had once mentored Michael, cleared his throat. Board members, we've reviewed these documents. They're authentic. Michael Cole holds controlling shares. Richard, you no longer have standing here. The vote was swift, unanimous. Richard's title dissolved like smoke. Security stepped forward, their shadows falling long across the floor. Vanessa, seated quietly at the edge of the room, clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had never seen Richard look so small, so cornered. She looked at Michael, expecting rage, expecting triumph. But what terrified her most was his calm. His expression hadn't changed since the moment he walked in. Richard lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger at him. You set me up. You planned this all along. Michael's eyes met his, cold and unblinking. No, Richard. You set yourself up the moment you thought ambition was a substitute for loyalty. And Vanessa, he turned briefly toward her, his voice colder still. The moment you walked out with him, you chose your side. Stay there. Security moved in, gripping Richard by the arms. His protests filled the room, but they sounded hollow, desperate. One by one, the board members turned away, their respect already shifted back to Michael. As Richard was dragged out, Vanessa sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding. The empire she thought she had stolen was crumbling, and Michael hadn't even raised his voice to do it. The penthouse was silent that night, emptier than it had ever felt. Richard was gone, dragged out of the boardroom like a disgraced child, his empire stripped from him in a single afternoon. His calls went unanswered, his allies scattered like frightened birds, and Vanessa was left alone in the ruins of a dream she thought was hers. For the first time since she had walked out of Michael's life, her confidence faltered. She scrolled through her phone, searching for messages of support, but the same friends who once cheered her on were suddenly quiet. A few had even unfollowed her, erasing the evidence that they had ever envied her new life. The glamorous photos that once brought admiration now attracted whispers of pity. She felt the walls close in. Her pride battled with her fear, but fear won. And so, late in the evening, Vanessa found herself standing in front of Michael's home, the same home she had once called hers. She hesitated at the gate, her heart pounding, before finally pressing the bell. Michael opened the door himself. He was still in his suit from the day, calm as ever, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, simply studying her face, the smudged makeup, the trembling lips, the desperate shine in her eyes. "Michael," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake." He didn't move, didn't invite her inside. The silence stretched, forcing her to fill it. She reached for his arm, her fingers brushing the fabric of his sleeve. "We can fix this. We can start over. I was wrong about you. Wrong about everything. Please don't let it end like this." Michael's eyes flickered briefly, not with pity, not with anger, but with something deeper. Memory. He saw the nights he stayed up building her boutique, the way she once smiled at him with genuine gratitude, the promises whispered between them when love was still real. He remembered the sacrifices, the patience, the belief that she would stand by him. And then he remembered the sound of her laughter as she left that party on another man's arm. Slowly he removed her hand from his sleeve and stepped back. His voice was quiet, but every word struck harder than a shout. "The party ended when you left with him. There's nothing left to fix." Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "Michael, please." But he shook his head, his calmness more devastating than rage. "You didn't just betray me, Vanessa. You mocked me. You mocked everything I gave you. And now you want to come back only because you've lost him. That's not love. That's desperation." Tears welled in her eyes, but Michael's gaze didn't soften. "You chose your side that night. Stay there." The door closed with a soft click, but to Vanessa it sounded like a final verdict, an iron gate slamming shut. She stood outside trembling, the weight of her choices crashing down. For the first time she realized Michael's silence hadn't been weakness. It had been her death sentence. Inside, Michael leaned against the door for a moment, his eyes closed. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but it was no longer the pain of loss. It was the clarity of a man who had seen the truth and decided never to carry that burden again. Richard's fall was louder than his rise. The man who once roared in boardrooms now shouted into phones that never answered, his voice echoing through empty spaces. He stormed into offices where his name had once commanded respect, only to be met with cold stares and closed doors. Accounts he thought were his lifeline were suddenly frozen. Allies who once swore loyalty vanished without explanation. Every move he made felt like quicksand, dragging him deeper the harder he struggled. He suspected betrayal everywhere, convinced that Michael's hand was behind each failure. And he was right. Michael had been preparing for this for months, long before Vanessa ever slipped away with Richard. Quiet legal filings, hidden trusts, silent agreements with key investors, all of it had been designed to ensure that the moment Richard tried to step into his shoes, the ground beneath him would crumble. Richard stormed into his lawyer's office, slamming papers onto the desk. This can't be legal. He's stripping me of everything. Every deal I've touched, every contract I've signed, it's all collapsing. He planned this. I know he did. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his face pale. Mr. Richard, there's nothing I can do. Michael Cole never surrendered his shares. You built everything on assumptions and forged promises. Legally, you don't own a thing. Richard's roar of frustration rattled the glass walls. He turned on his heel. His fists clenched and stormed out, leaving silence in his wake. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat alone in the penthouse, the glamour of their new life stripped away. The phone calls stopped. The invitations dried up. Even the friends who once envied her diamonds now whispered about her downfall. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, seeing not a victor, but a woman whose choices had chained her to a sinking ship. One evening, Richard burst into the penthouse, his suit disheveled, his face twisted with rage. "He's ruined me," he shouted, pacing the room like a trapped animal. "Every door is closed. Every account is locked. I can't move without running into his wall of silence." Vanessa's voice trembled. "What do we do?" Richard stopped, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking. "We fight. We take him down publicly. If he thinks he can embarrass me in front of the board, I'll drag his name through the mud in front of the world." But even as he spoke, there was no conviction in his voice. His empire had been hollow, built on borrowed ambition and stolen loyalty, and now it was collapsing piece by piece. The press had already begun reporting his losses, investors distancing themselves, and whispers spreading that Richard had always been nothing more than Michael's shadow. Across the city, Michael sat in quiet confidence. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, didn't chase headlines. He simply watched as the trap closed tighter, knowing that Richard's destruction wasn't his doing alone. It was Richard's greed, Richard's arrogance, and Vanessa's betrayal that had dug the grave. Michael had only handed them the shovel. By the end of the week, Richard's name was no longer spoken with admiration, but with pity. Businessmen who once toasted him now laughed quietly at his fall. And as his empire disintegrated, one truth became clear. Michael had never needed to raise his voice to win. His silence had been enough. The storm had quieted, but only on the surface. Richard was finished, his empire a carcass stripped bare by vultures. But Michael knew one more strike remained. Vanessa had not yet felt the full weight of her betrayal. She had lost status, yes, and watched Richard crumble, but she still clung to a desperate hope that somehow she could return to the man she once mocked and reclaim a portion of his life, his wealth, his protection. That hope ended the day Michael called his lawyer to finalize the documents. The study was quiet when Mr. Adenia laid the papers across the desk. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, placing each one carefully as he explained. "Your will is airtight now. Every trust, every asset, every clause is sealed. Should anything happen to you, your wealth flows directly into the foundation under your mother's name. Vanessa receives nothing." Michael traced a finger along the edge of the papers, his face unreadable. He thought of his late mother, a woman who had raised him on discipline and dignity, who taught him that generosity meant nothing without wisdom. She had once said, "Don't give everything to someone who sees you only as a convenience." At the time, he hadn't understood. Now it was truth carved into stone. He signed his name, each stroke steady, final. That evening, Vanessa arrived again. She had traded the diamonds for something simpler, a white blouse and jeans, her hair tied back. She looked smaller, humbled, but Michael saw through it. He knew desperation when it wore the mask of humility. "Michael," she whispered as he opened the door, "please listen to me. I know I've made mistakes. I chose wrong, but we built a life together. I gave you years of my life. Don't shut me out completely. I can change." Michael let her words hang in the air, his gaze steady. He didn't invite her in, didn't soften at her trembling voice. Instead, he spoke evenly, as though reciting a verdict. "You didn't just leave, Vanessa. You mocked me. You turned my patience into weakness, my silence into a joke. And when you thought I had nothing left, you danced on my grave." She shook her head quickly, tears rising. "I didn't mean—" But he cut her off. "The will is signed. Everything I've built, Everything I've worked for, it's already secured in my mother's foundation. Your boutique, your lifestyle, your diamonds, they were all built on my back, and now you'll lose them the way you lost me." Her tears spilled freely now, her hands trembling as she reached for him. But Michael stepped back, his expression as cold as marble. "You'll inherit nothing from me, Vanessa. Nothing but the memory of what you destroyed." For the first time, her sobs were real, raw, stripped of arrogance, but they fell against a wall that no longer cared. Michael closed the door slowly, and as the lock clicked, he whispered to himself almost like a prayer. Patience before destruction, always. The rain fell hard that night, drumming against the city like the sound of judgment. The streets glistened under the harsh glow of streetlights, and the once bustling penthouse now stood silent, its windows dark. Vanessa stumbled outside, her hair clinging wet to her face, her emerald gown, once the jewel of her triumph, torn at the hem. She no longer looked like the woman who had walked out of Michael's life with laughter on her lips. She looked like a shadow, stripped of everything but regret. Richard was gone. After the boardroom humiliation, he had vanished into the cracks of the city, leaving nothing behind but debts and unanswered calls. The man she abandoned her marriage for had become a ghost, and with him went the last scraps of security she thought she had stolen. Her boutique had closed, investors pulling out one after another when Michael's lawyers quietly withdrew their backing. Friends no longer picked her calls, too afraid to be seen standing beside her name. Even family distanced themselves, ashamed of her choices splattered across headlines. Everywhere she turned, doors slammed shut. And so, with nowhere left to go, Vanessa found herself back outside Michael's estate, the rain soaking through her clothes, her mascara running in black rivers down her face. She pounded on the iron gate with trembling fists, her voice breaking. "Michael, please don't leave me like this. I was wrong. I was blind. I chose wrong. Can't you see that?" Her cries echoed into the night, but the only response was silence. Then headlights appeared through the sheets of rain. A black G-Wagon rolled slowly down the drive, its engine a low growl. Vanessa's heart leapt as it stopped just short of the gate. Through the windshield she saw him, Michael, his face illuminated for a brief second by the dashboard glow. Calm, unreadable, unshaken. She stumbled forward, pressing her hands against the bars. "Please, Michael, give me one more chance. Don't let it end like this. I can be better. I can make it right." For a long moment, the only sound was the pounding rain and the steady hum of the engine. Then the tinted window lowered just enough for his voice to cut through the storm. His words were soft, but they struck harder than any scream. "Some losses aren't sudden, Vanessa. They're planned, delivered, and unforgettable." Her breath caught, her sobs twisting into a desperate plea, but Michael didn't wait to hear the rest. The window rolled up, the engine roared, and the G-Wagon pulled away slowly, its taillights glowing red through the downpour until they disappeared into the darkness. Vanessa collapsed to her knees, her hands covering her face as the rain drowned her cries. For the first time, she understood the true meaning of silence. Not weakness, not surrender, but judgment. Michael's silence had been her undoing all along. Inside the car, Michael's face remained expressionless as the city lights blurred past. The pain was still there, buried deep, but it no longer owned him. He had delivered his justice, not with rage, but with patience, and in doing so, he had freed himself from her forever. The night swallowed the sound of the car as it disappeared, leaving Vanessa in the rain, alone with nothing but the echo of what she had lost.